Ladies and gentlemen, we got a special guest today talking about the Book of Elon. We got Eric Jorgensen. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Right off the bat, I'm curious. You said one of the ways this book transformed you the most was how it affected your imagination. I had an idea a while back about how do we strengthen some of these things that are a little bit more soft skills in our life, and the imagination was one thing I want to get better at. How have you strengthened your imagination, and what practices have you found to actually help you develop that skill?
Yeah, I think imagination is sort of composed of a bunch of different things. I've always loved sci-fi, and that's been a big piece of kind of just getting you to think new thoughts. Like that's what I love in any sort of work of art. But sci-fi in particular gets you to sort of think new thoughts about the future. And where Elon comes in is I think it's very easy to sort of fantasize about the future in these like far off grandiose ways. But he really has a knack for like turning that sci-fi, shrinking the gap between the fiction and the reality and the possible, partly through his lived experience of what he's done, but also partly through the sort of the tools for thought that he gives people. And the way that he views the world is like, how can we build what is currently considered impossible and make it possible? And I think that is this amazing way to combine, imagination for how good things could be with remembering and recalling and always sort of knowing that we can close that gap. Like it's on us. Like if I were to distill this book all the way down to like 2-3 words, that is high effort optimism. And so the imagination comes in of like, all right, how good could things be? The future could be amazing. There's so much to be optimistic about, but we can't be just turning that over to fate. Like you got to go out there and grind on the problem to actually close the gap and make it better.
So as far as making it like a daily practice or that sort of thing, is it simply just expanding your content diet or whatever into more inputs and I guess broadening your focus? Or how can we actually get a better, more imaginative vision of the future?
Yeah, I think there's one or two habits, very very small, is just to kind of ask like why or why not. You can kind of train yourself around trigger words, like when someone says that can't be done, or we can't do that, or that's impossible, or that's not how it works. Like those are little flags that they're not even actually thinking about what could be possible. I do think, as you suggested, sort of getting out of your typical ruts of content and just trying to like think new thoughts is a really good one. I also like to look back at history. So many things that we are surrounded by, so many pieces of technology we're using right now were impossible like 10 years ago, but certainly 100 years ago. And almost everything that we think today would have been unbelievably unfathomable 1,000 years ago, which is just not that much time in the scheme of things. It's a lot for a human life, but it's not a lot in the grand scheme of time. And so really understanding kind of the stories of people who broke through those imagination barriers. Like I think the Wright brothers are maybe like the best example. That was not that long ago that humans had just never flown. 150 years maybe. And now it's obvious that humans can fly. Now we have, commercial aviation and all these different, we got helicopters, we got planes, we got drones, we've been to space. Like that, it is difficult from this side of the fence to really appreciate how much imagination and courage and ingenuity it took to actually break through that and how crazy they looked. My buddy George Mack wrote a great essay on high agency. It's on highagency.com. And it tells the Wright brothers story, among many others, of people who just kind of had that ability to have a strong imagination and then do the work to close the gap between imagination and reality.
What can we learn about your research process? This is the third biography book that you've completed, and I just almost can't get my head around how much information that you have processed between Naval, Balaji, and then now Elon. What is your process like to get your arms around all this stuff?
Yeah. So at a very high level, I mean, there are kind of hundreds of small steps along the way, but to just kind of put it in big chunks, it is collect everything they've ever said publicly, like build a giant spreadsheet of all their interviews, essays, as much of their kind of long form social content as you can. It's a lot of just frankly kind of grindy work. Then going through all of it in a organized, methodical way and pulling out, I think of it as like collecting the good nuggets. I just sort of pull out all the pieces that I think are good. And as you do that, these patterns start to emerge, and you sort of, you collect all these puzzle pieces, from millions of words, you end up with hundreds of thousands of great words. And then you sort of start to see patterns, and you start to see the relationships between the ideas. You start to see which things are revisited most often. You can filter out and find the best articulation of each idea. And you start to see where the seams sort of fit together, where the ideas build on each other, where the answer, the question that naturally arises from one sort of piece leads to the explanation of another. And you sort of organically put those together. Like most of the work of building these books feels to me like doing a jigsaw puzzle. It's not really like writing. I'm not telling you what I think about Elon. I am building this book out of Elon's direct words out of his own mouth. And I want it to feel like he's speaking directly to you, like you're sitting across the table from him, getting like personally mentored by the greatest living entrepreneur. And that comes from, all of the raw material coming directly out of his mouth, and just having the discipline to keep that as a constraint for the project. And then you just kind of like rejigger and remove things that feel like they interrupt the flow or stick out, or and then it's kind of, you're in the sculpting phase until you get from kind of the last 100,000 words down to the last like 50,000. So you start with 2 to 5 million words of source material from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different sources, and like through this process of years of curation, distilling down, and organizing, you end up with like 50,000 of the tightest, most useful, most timeless, most evergreen ideas, hopefully in the right order, that kind of feed one to the next and keep you moving, and in a rich enough, dense enough way that even though it's an easy read, like this is like a 6th grade reading level, and like I actually run tests on this to be sure that it's super accessible and super easy pace for anybody to read, but you're also getting a useful idea on every single page. Like that's kind of how I want it to feel.
Yeah. I mean, that comes through very clearly.
That worked. I actually have a KPI around this. Like I want to be the most most densely highlighted books on Kindle. And I was just on the Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, and they looked it up during the episode. The Almanac of Naval is number 88 on the all-time 100 most densely highlighted books on Kindle. Like that is, I think, there's no better indication that like, the book is worth your time than a metric like that.
I've always wondered about that because it seems like there's a sweet spot between storytelling and then just distilling down wisdom to the most pithy, punchy statement possible. And how did you navigate that tension? Because you lean too far in any direction, and now you whatever, it's the punchiness lacks any teeth and it just becomes a cliche, and then if it's a story, people lose interest. So did you, maybe even wider than this book, how do you think about that when advising authors with their writing?
Yeah, I think Morgan Housel has a great sentence about sentences, which is, people don't remember books, they remember sentences. And so I think that you need to have a really powerful discipline around finding and highlighting those memorable sentences as much as you can. But also it's really hard, especially if someone is new to a concept like first principles thinking or thinking in limits, which are kind of two of Elon's like go-to kind of mental models. Those don't mean anything to you unless you've got stories and examples to attach it to. And so if you think of like, Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett, like they're great communicators, and it's often because they have a sentence that you remember and a story that it sticks to. And I think having both of those, like we either relate to stories and the story sort of gives us the meat, and then the the sentence is like the file folder or the name of the maxim or something like that is actually the part that you can recall right off the bat. But I think it's really hard for people to recall long sort of explanations or justifications in a nonfiction way. Like that is a very, usually either technical or academic trait. It just doesn't stick in the average person's mind nearly as well as just stories and maxims.
What did you learn about yourself in the creative process? Because this isn't necessarily a traditional book where you're crafting memorable sentences or coming up with the content. But you're curating this, but it's still a very creative process. And I'm curious, what patterns emerged? Would you observe or learn about yourself? And what was maybe the part of this that required the most creativity?
I think it's a very I tell authors this all the time because they get hung up on it. So when I'm not writing books, I'm helping other people write books. As I'm CEO at Scribe Media, we publish a few hundred books a year, and so I spend a lot of time with authors or aspiring authors, helping them through creative crossroads or finding the right path to publishing or getting their book out in the world or marketing their book or whatever it is. And one of the things I tell people often is like, fuck originality. Originality is a false god that so many artists and creatives kind of worship at that altar, and it ends up getting you really stuck because it's a terrible goal, and going for it almost by definition means you're going to do something that's completely useless, or you're going to feel this like creative impossibility of the task. And if what you actually do is shoot for a combination of authenticity and excellence, you will end up making something original. And what you'll realize in doing that is actually that you are unique and original and there's no one like you. But if you try to shoot directly for originality, you're going to do something kooky and insane and useless because you're going to try to do something different than has ever been done before. And there's reasons that the same ideas sort of come up. There's reasons there's a great habits book. There's a reason there's a great world building fiction series. There's reasons why the romance novels all sort of follow some of these same formulas, because that's what humans love and that's what resonates with people. There's no award for like being deeply original. And there's a bunch of great quotes. I think it was David Perel. I don't remember if he was quoting somebody else, but originality is just having obscure sources is another one. Like just totally demystifying that need. And once you embrace that, you sort of realize that creation and curation live on this axis, and they're not actually very far apart from each other on this axis. Like when you hear, even great artists that you consider very original, they talk about their influences, and you can sort of go back through their history and you could see the greats that they imitated or learned from before them. You can see how, like Paul Simon, like created one of the most original albums of all time by merging his existing style with like going to Africa and learning a bunch about African music. And it was like this incredibly fresh thing that nobody had ever heard before, but it was just because his audience was, an ocean away from his influences. And, I just really, I lean into curation as an art form here. Like I don't try to put myself in the middle of it. I don't try to make it about my opinion of the person. I just try to be useful to the reader and shine a light on people and ideas that I think are useful. And I'm perfectly content with that being sort of my contribution. I think it's a unique format. I think the response to the first book really showed the power of a medium like this, of a curation approach. And I'm really excited to see what, that sort of format combined with, I think, one of the most accomplished and certainly most famous people alive, what that can do as a book.
So as you say that, my mind is wandering over to Elon, and does he have influences that he has pulled from, and is he a curator basically of his own ideas, or is this idea to go to Mars, is that an original idea, or any one of his companies?
No, I mean, this is this kind of brings us back to sci-fi and imagination, right? Like growing up, he was into like Dungeons and Dragons. He played a ton of video games. He read, shelves and shelves and shelves of sci-fi. And he also grew up in a family of adventurers and engineers and entrepreneurs. And so this is to some extent part of their family culture. You know, Elon's cousins have been very successful. Other people in his family have built companies and been, you know, renowned engineers. So I think there's a lot of like native talent there, but the biggest influences that he has aren't contemporary entrepreneurs. They are the great leaders of history, often military history. So I think if you study Napoleon, even at a very like high level, right? Like if you listen to like David Senra's episodes about Napoleon and then his episodes about Elon, you'll see a lot of the same sort of strategic and leadership impulses, right? Like Elon leads from the front. You know, if there's a surge going on in a factory, he is in that factory. That's the same thing Napoleon said, and the same way Napoleon worked. Young Napoleon, he worked from the front. He led the charges. He knew that wherever he was, the troops would fight hardest there. He had an incredible bias to action, and there were like a number of times in, you know, the history of Napoleon's rise where minutes or potentially seconds of delay would have lost, you know, a war or a front or an initiative that he won because he had this incredible bias to speed. You know, the story about Napoleon marching his army through the French Alps, which was dangerous to the point of obvious stupidity. Like nobody thought an army could march through these high passes in the mountains, and Napoleon did it. And it worked because it was a high risk, high payoff thing that nobody thought was possible. And you can certainly draw the analogy to reusable rockets. Like even the smartest rocket engineers in the world with a a much bigger budget than he had couldn't do it. And he was like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And that ended up being this sort of strategic, high risk, high reward shortcut that even though the odds of success were low, the payoff was so big, and his grit and his momentum and his, you know, decisions along the way were so good that he did make it through that pass. And so, you know, I don't think Napoleon is somebody that many contemporary entrepreneurs are studying, but like there's certainly a lot to learn from him, and you can see that in some of these patterns.
So it makes me think your content diet is one of the most important things you can be disciplined and aware of, because those are where your ideas are coming from.
Just riffing on that, like I heard Sam Teller, who was Elon's personal assistant for many years through some of the craziest things, said a great line about this. You can only conceive of the level of excellence you've personally observed. And I think that, you know, that was one of his biggest takeaways from like being in the room with Elon for so many years, is like, I know what, you know, truly great looks like now, and being calibrated to that is really interesting. And if you don't feel like you have that in your everyday life, you know, to your media diet example, like if the person that you think is the best in the world is actually a 5 out of 10 because you haven't found your way to reading about or following or listening to the people who are truly a 10 out of 10, like you're going to get your ass kicked. Because you're going to be like out in the world with one arm tied behind your back, not knowing that everybody else has 4 arms. And like, that's going to be a real disadvantage.
So between you studying Naval, Balaji's, and now Elon, it's like, my gosh, this guy has just, like, do you feel like this information has reprogrammed you in a way where,
yeah, that was the point.
But even more so than like, it's probably reprogrammed you the most as the author, obviously, because you spend the most time with it. And
like that's why, you know, I would be happy to write these books even if I never sold a copy and nobody ever read them. Like, because I love the process of creating them for myself, for the construction of my own like abilities and worldview and understanding of the world. Like that's, you know, books are so hard to make successful that if you go out saying like my bar for happiness for this book is going to sell even 10,000 copies, like you're crazy and you should go do something else. Like you've got to be happy producing a book for its own sake. It's the only way to make it through like a many years long process. It's the only way to have a high enough bar for the quality of the work. It's the only way to have like a truly internal scorecard with the whole thing. Because this book could sell 1,000 copies or could sell 10 million, and I don't know. And I'm totally happy with wherever it ends up in between, because I'm just grateful for the experience of having created it.
When it comes to reprogramming your mind with ideas that you like from Elon Naval, so to speak,
Yeah.
Is it a process of just repetition and going over those same ideas until they've been drilled into you?
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to do this, and I think the effectiveness sort of depends on the person. Very tactically, I'll start with, I use Readwise to like review my highlights. I do have a short list of books that I really like to revisit often because I want them sort of drilled into my head, the physical books. Like I'll pick it up, and rather than reading a new book, I'll spend an hour reading my highlights or my notes from a previous book. Um, the the way medical school works, which is why it's such a good practice, is they have I think their mantra is like watch one, do one, teach one. And so you sort of observe an operation, then you do one yourself, and then you teach one to someone else. And the act of teaching it, trying to reprocess it, put it in your own words, externalize it, explain it to someone else, is a much higher bar than watching it or just taking it in. And that's how you really like make it your own. So when you're rephrasing these concepts in your own words, when you find yourself able to, I think you joked about like you would, as you're reading this book, you were like explaining it to your wife. Like that's actually a great way to own the concepts. Because if you can recreate them in your own head when they matter, then they really become yours to use. Then they're actually like tools in your tool belt instead of just like something that washed over you one time. David Senra, I don't remember if this is an original line of his, but he says learning is changing behavior. Like you didn't learn something just because you have the information in your head. You learn something if you change how you act based on the new information. And that is a very different and much higher bar. And you see people all the time, you sort of get stuck in this, like, all they do is consume. They feel productive. It's kind of this like productivity, entrepreneurship porn thing where they just like watch stuff all day but never actually do anything. Yes. And if you told them to, if you sat them in front of a blank sheet of paper and said like, tell me everything you just learned, they couldn't do it. And if you said like, show me what behaviors you've changed in the last month or the last year as a result of what you've learned, they couldn't do it either. And that it is worth infinity times more to just take like one good idea from this book. Just like as soon as you find something you're like, I should apply that, just put the book down. Like go apply it, go own that concept and really make it your own immediately and feel the momentum of that thing working. Then, pick it up and find the next idea.
Moving on, I got a question, and this is probably going to be the only dark side question, shadow question. I don't want to make this into anything disparaging Elon, but I am very curious about this. And in scripture, there's a verse like, what does it profit for a man to gain the whole world, but then lose his soul? And I'm not saying that he's lost his soul, but do you think there's a balance or a point of too far? Or I know he talks about 100-hour work weeks and grinding, but then you look at some of the science of high performance and it's like, well, rest is actually just as important as actually doing the thing. And is it just as simple that he's made differently and wired differently? Or do you think there's some fallacies or some toxic productivity that just sounds incredible that actually might not be the best advice? Leave it there. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to sort of attack this. I guess the most important is the frame of like, this is not advice. Like I don't care what you do. Whether you want to work 20 hours a week or 100 hours a week, whether you want to work on going to Mars or, world peace, like you do you. The only thing that this book is sort of set out to do is like show you what Elon does. Like the question it's answering is not what should you do? It is like, how does Elon do it? This is one of the most productive and like highly leveraged people on earth. And I'm not saying you should want to be him. You probably don't. Even if you probably can't. Like even if you could be him, you probably don't want to. You probably want to do something more authentic to you.
People look to him as a role model though. And so I'm not saying this book is necessarily advice, but I know a lot of people think like grind harder. Like Elon says, you got to be. I don't. I feel like Elon has said you have like you got to do things like this. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
No, I mean he's there's probably off the top of my head, you can't change the world on 40 hours a week. Like he says, like if you are working 80 hours a week when somebody else is working 40, like you're going to cover twice as much ground as them. He absolutely burns through people because he demands like maximum intensity. He sets insane, like not insane deadlines, but like deadlines that he knows only have a 50% chance of being met. Like he's constantly compressing timelines. He's constantly asking more from people. He's pushing people out if he feels like they're getting soft. Like all of those things are true. And whether you want to do them or not is totally up to you. But I think it's a really, like I choose not to, right? Like I'm not working 100-hour weeks. I'm also not working on like getting us to Mars today. I mean, I am in an indirect way in that, like, I help you pick up this book and dedicate yourself to some of these missions, but like, I'm not, an engineer working at SpaceX. But I think that there's a lot, back to that sort of like excellence. You can only conceive of the level of excellence you've observed, even if the only thing you take away is like, holy shit, that guy is working hard and earned it. Like that's a perfectly fine takeaway, and you don't have to change anything about your behavior if you don't want to. If you see this new bar for effort and excellence and focus and ability and say, you know what, I could probably turn it up a notch or two. Like I could probably give it 10% more or 20% more. That's still a great outcome. But I will say, like he is the greatest living entrepreneur. He has outperformed even the GOATs, even the best of our generation. And he's done it multiple times sort of in parallel. Like Tesla and SpaceX either would have been incredible accomplishments, but he's done them both in parallel. From like as a immigrant, right, to the United States. And he started early and he worked hard and he took massive risks to keep going all in. But the thing, he's not 10,000 times smarter than the next person, and he's not working 10,000 times harder than the next person. So like the focus on hard work is actually so much less important than the mindset and the method of the work, right? He, especially spread across the companies, there's so many people working harder, more hours on their company already than Elon does on either Tesla or SpaceX or the Boring Company or XAI or whatever it is. The magic comes from the combination of a few factors. One is like attacking the bottleneck. Whatever the limiting factor is, that's what he's working on. He moves towards it immediately. He solves it effectively. He compresses the timeline to actually creating that resolution. The combination of like huge mission, attacking the limiting factor, moving extremely quickly, all of those things multiply the effectiveness. So it doesn't actually matter like whether he's working, it matters a little, but not nearly as much whether he's working 50 hours a week or 100 hours a week. And there's only specific some chapters in life. He worked 100 hours a week during the Tesla Model 3 push and during the I think like the Dragon engine push. Like there's been a few times of like true crisis where it's like every hour matters. We have to make it through this keyhole or this whole company dies. And like that's where the sleep in the factory 100-hour weeks come in. And they were long, painful periods. It's probably, we're not talking about a week, we're talking about months or short number of years. But he also is first to acknowledge like that takes a toll. Like I lived in fight or flight. I'm wired for war. And he has both some nature and nurture aspects of him that lend him to that. He has a reputation for like creating crisis even when they don't exist, for wanting to live in wartime, because that's who he is. Those patterns are authentic to him in a way that they won't necessarily be to everybody, which is why I say like it's not advice, and even if it was, you probably can't do it. It's just, it is new information, and you like do with it what you will.
Something that struck me was his I didn't know about his first company. And so he got he sold the company, whatever, got like $20 million, and then went right into PayPal or whatever, the origins of PayPal. And where this question is going, it seems like wealth doesn't have a hold on him. He's now become the richest man or one of the richest men in the world. And it doesn't feel like he's doing any of this for money. How has your perspective on wealth changed in the course of studying Elon?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most common misconceptions of him. I think people assume that because he's, the richest man on earth, that he's like money motivated, and he's very much not. And if you understand, as you point out, like his history and the number of times he took insane financial risks, like insane financial risks, in order to further his missions. He is uniquely purpose driven. I think he's very driven to win. I think, valuable companies that solve massive problems are the outcome of, his desire to win and his desire to engineer new things that solve big problems. Almost all of his wealth is in those stocks. And he actually went through a period where he was sort of getting, when people were like mad at billionaires, he's like, fine. He sold all his possessions and like lived in a tiny home at Starbase. It's a very, but it does take that sort of understanding of his history and the decisions that he's made over and over again to prioritize it, even a small chance of success for the mission that he's on, over preserving his own personal wealth or even his own reputation, frankly. And this is why the diehard fans of Elon are so diehard, is because there are so few people, even among the great entrepreneurs, that are willing to truly like live that way and walk the walk. Bill Gates is a great example. There's a story from I think this is in Isaacson's biography, where when Tesla was going through a hard time, Bill Gates is like famously a climate activist, right? He's a big philanthropist. He's like trying to solve all these problems. He was one of the people who sort of brought climate change to popular awareness and was like donating money to try to solve it. And yet, when Tesla, who's like one of the leading companies in the electrification and reduction of climate change and pollution related to cars, was going through a hard time, he put on a massive short position against Tesla because he thought it would make him money. And Elon was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, how can you be such a hypocrite? How can you prioritize, like, you as already one of the richest people on earth, prioritize another few $100 million over, while attacking someone who's directly working on the mission that you purport to care about? Like, what sort of psycho are you? And so Elon wouldn't talk to him at all about that, like that whole thing. It was a whole very funny. But that is, there are so few people, and I'm not saying that Elon is perfect, but I'm like, there are many, 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 many examples of him being willing to sacrifice almost everything that he has to continue, for even a chance of success at continuing these missions that are missions on behalf of humanity. People around him have said, like, it is very, he sometimes treats individual humans harshly, but he cares a lot about humanity as a whole. And, Tesla's mission to advance clean energy and reduce climate change, SpaceX's mission to make humanity and life generally, this is not just about humans, but also about like plants, animals, and consciousness interplanetary, so that it's safer from any potential crisis. These are noble missions, that, like, if you remove the emotions and the personality from it and get people past their bias, like, very hard to argue with. And you would want to believe everybody could sort of at some level get on board with some of these missions. And that's what I'm hoping to open a few minds up to with this book. And I've seen cracks in that already. Like, there's a story, I don't know if you saw, I shared this like a couple of weeks ago. I hired an editor to help me work on this book. He was a young kid out of college, and his dad was really upset that he was working on a book on Elon Musk. This is like 2025. This is kind of peak like negativity in the headlines and the general mainstream media. And everybody thought Elon was the worst guy in the world. And he was furious. He said he wouldn't read this book, and, couldn't believe he was spending his time on this. And over time, Dylan just sort of put a page, just like as it came up at the dinner table, like put a page in front of his dad. It was just like, just read this one page. Just read this one page and see what you think. And to his credit, his dad read it. It's kind of like, okay, like, I don't have anything to disagree with on this page. And then a few weeks later, it happened again. And one was about, The first was about these missions, the missions that the companies are on, and they come from a sense of duty to humanity into the future. And the second was about Tesla's mission to actually drive the cost of their products down so that more people drive electric, so that there's less pollutants in the air, and that it's a better product. Most all the other auto companies, you see them trying to charge more, and Tesla's the only one actively bringing the cost of their products down. And that was the one that got him to be like, all right, I'll read this book. And so he read this book, an early draft, and then he started reading a little more on Elon. And to his massive credit, because so few people are willing to do this, he's holding two opposing ideas in his head. He says, I still don't agree with him politically, but I really respect him as an entrepreneur. I respect Tesla and the mission that it's on and the product that they built. And he went out and bought a Tesla. And he's like, this thing is the coolest thing. Like, self-driving is a miracle. I'm so glad we have this. Like, what an amazing example of open-mindedness and willingness to think critically and hold, not necessarily a consensus tribal view in his head.
Yeah.
And even more credit to him for him being like, yeah, go ahead, tell that story. Like, that is awesome. And I hope this book serves that purpose for people to sort of bridge that gap. I know Elon fans will love this book, but I do think it might help people sort of understand a little bit more about, the motivations or the companies or the missions themselves.
I'm curious, a couple of questions here. A little bit of a left turn here. AI, as far as writing, as far as authorship, how have you? It seems like it's a confusing space right now with using AI to speed to market, whatever, getting your ideas out there versus maintaining an authentic voice and sounding human or unique to who you are. How have you manage that tension of using tools like AI, but also, you're an author. So how would you advise somebody to think about that moving forward?
Yeah, this is a tough question to answer just because the answers change so quickly. Like, what I said a year ago is probably not what I would say today. So we'll have to timestamp this answer as of March 2026.
Yeah.
But I think the overarching view that I have, and this part is actually a timeless thing, is use the best tool for the job. Whatever the best tool for the job is, use it. I don't think, and this is something that is early in my book on biology, a lot of people have this inherent bias that the more work went into something, the better it is. The more effort, the more hours. And the example that he uses is is light more valuable if it comes from someone standing beside you holding a candle, or if it comes from a lamp? There's no moral value in the exact same chair if one person handcrafted it out of wood with hand tools versus somebody else who used power tools versus one that came off of a factory line. But one is going to be a lot cheaper. And if you were attracted to the story around one, fine, great, wonderful. But the moral good comes from making a higher quality of life accessible to more and more people, which usually comes from higher quality tools and scaled processes. And so my view on this is it's very easy, and a lot of writers, I think, and editors and sort of creatives are falling into this trap currently of whatever the current right way is, that is the morally good and just way. And anything that removes the number of human hours that go into a product is bad. And that's not how we view any historical innovation, but it's how we tend to view the transformations that we happen to be living through. So I always try to remind myself, let's use the best tool for the job. These tools are capable of things now that they weren't a year ago. And they were good. They were helpful for sort of transcription and feedback a year ago. They are now, I think, a little more helpful in terms of generating novel options. And they're way more useful in terms of thoughtful critique and surfacing of ideas and things like that. The intelligence of the models is going up. And something that's a little counterintuitive is now that options are free. Your taste is still valuable, but you can generate a huge number of options much more quickly than you could before, and much more quickly and with probably higher fidelity than you're likely to yourself. And so everybody's got different processes, different strengths. They'll use the tools in different ways, but I try to make sure that I avoid like feeling like I'm in a moral trap of the present, or and remembering that at the very, very end of the day, like, it is the reader's benefit who, like, it is the customer or the reader or the end user that you want to keep in mind most. And charging them more for the same thing because you can't or don't want to use, a new tool that comes along is certainly like not to their benefit.
I hear some kids in the background. I remember you had kids, right? You got 2 kids or 3?
I got one.
One kid. Okay. I got one as well.
I got one, but he's as loud as 2.
That's good, man. How are you thinking about education with him in the future as far as higher education? I think maybe even grade school is, maybe some open new creative ways around that. But, you've studied all these brilliant thinkers, and it's not like a new idea that school has created us for an industrial society, and our society's changing so fast. And I'm just curious how you're thinking about that.
I don't have a good answer yet on college, which is good because it's still a long way away. I do like the best answer, just because there's so many jobs to be done in college. I think the jobs to be done of earlier school is a little more clear. But there's, I basically would just point you to Alpha School. Like Alpha School, Mackenzie Price and Joe Liemt, I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong, they've done a bunch of great podcasts. I think this model is the future. And basically, as soon as we started to see even half decent AI tools like 10 years ago, it's kind of like, all right, education is going to get like completely reorganized around personalization for the individual student. They can move at their own pace. They can achieve mastery because they can all move at their own pace. There's going to be different learning modalities. We're going to be able to organize around information around specific topics and interests that the kids have. So like they don't have to sit there and learn biology. They can learn biology through basketball if they're really into basketball, or animals if they're really into animals. Like you could personalize all these things in just a way that people who are educated with the new tools that are coming out over the next couple decades are going to, I think, seem almost superhuman compared to kind of the level of education that we have today. And in particular, unfortunately, I think public education system of the past 80 years has been a borderline miracle. I think it's in a tough downward spiral today. And I think they need to like adapt quickly to some of the new tools and models that are coming out. But yeah, go read about Alpha School and listen to a few of the podcasts is basically the short version of my answer.
Go check it out.
They'll say it better than I will.
How should a 45-year-old think about the disruption that's happening? They've been in a career for like 20 years, and now everything that they know is changing.
The mental model that I have about this particular period of time is that there are superpowers available to you just sitting on the ground in front of you. You are Mario standing in front of like a magic mushroom, and if you just pick it up and nibble it, you will start to feel the power, and you will start to become, you'll blow your own mind. Like at least weekly and sometimes daily, I find myself just like giggling when I see AI do something well that I'm just gobsmacked that it's doing. I don't think every job will change. I think some of the headlines, of course, are like, hyperventilating. I think these transitions happen slower than most people fear. But they certainly happen, and some people don't think they'll happen at all. I just wrote a post called The Awkward Robot Overlap that looks at some of the historical transformations like this. So I think it'll be slower than the headlines are claiming. But I think if you're standing in front of a magic mushroom and all your coworkers are taking it, and you're sort of standing there debating whether or not it works and whether or not it should exist, like you have nobody to blame but yourself. So I think just start playing with it. Like you don't have to read everything. You don't have to learn everything. You don't need to read the whole history of AI. You just need to start playing with it. And similar to the question you asked about the writing process, just use the best tools for your job. And if you don't think this matters yet or is useful yet, I'll tell you, like, things have changed quickly. Certainly since the beginning of this year, they are very, very different than they were, 6 months ago or a year ago in terms of what's possible. So keep trying, try again, try the higher quality tools, try different things, talk to people in your life who are good at it, get them to sit down and show you. Don't give up after the first try or the first 5 tries. But use the best tools for the job and figure out how to apply these superpowers, man. Like, this is just whether this is fully true or not, what I'm about to say is not yet clear. But even if it's wrong, if it turns out to be wrong, by a degree or 2 or 10, in 10 years, it's not going to matter. But a useful belief at this moment is that this change is bigger than the internet and maybe bigger than computers. And if you were approaching your career from a well, I'm not going to use these computers, or I don't need the internet to do my job, like, those are insane things that no one would say now. But you do hear people say that now about AI, and that's a tell that they're just not zoomed out quite enough, or that basically the fear is winning. And I was like, you got to just lean into that. You got to lean into that fear a little bit, and as Elon would say, stare directly at the fear and it will disappear. Mm-hmm. This is a time, even if you get laid off tomorrow, great, fantastic. Use that time to become more superpowered. If you didn't get laid off, great. Use these tools to stay ahead and just continue to do better at your job. And if you're in a deeply bureaucratic job, you can probably find that you can do your job in a few hours a week and nobody else will notice. And if you're in a job where you're rewarded for, increasing your input, I have people on my team who are doing literally 5x the work that they were a year ago with these new tools. And now we're trying to, as quickly as humanly possible, scale that skill, talent, and ability out to more and more people on the team. And over time, it'll become clear who is going to pick up those superpowers and run with them and who's not. And I think increasingly the companies that win are going to be the ones who are a small team of superpowered people.
All right, last question. I've seen these posts that you make of these AI generated pictures that is not the ones you're probably thinking of, not the book promotions, which are awesome. That was creative. Those are always good chuckle. But the ones where it's Tron meets the Shire, and
oh yeah. That's a good description. I like that.
Talk to me about this vision as we bring it full circle. You talked in the beginning about having a vision of the future and going to try to shorten that gap. And I have never, before you, I had not envisioned a future like that. And the first time I saw this picture, I'm like, is that something I would want or not? And then it's grown on me. And I think just talk to me about that vision. What is this vision of the future you have?
Yeah. So I don't remember where I found this, but if you search, kind of the term for the aesthetic is Solarpunk, and it's an optimistic vision of the future that sort of, in my view, elegantly combines our fundamental biology and our need to be a part of nature and surrounded by nature with an appreciation for the magic and abundance provided by technology. So we're not going to, I hate these kind of solarpunk, neo-Tokyo, dark dystopian things. I don't want to live in that future. I also don't want to live like the Amish and totally regress and reject all technology. What I want to live in the 2050 that I'm working towards personally, and the aesthetic that I'm trying to create, this drives my investing thesis around that I in my venture fund. Like, I want to live in a world that blends natural harmony with technological abundance. I want to live in this like lush garden. I want to hear birds and water running, and I want to be surrounded by plants, and I want to eat delicious, fresh, local food. And I want to feel the sun on my skin, and I want to spend a lot of time outside. But I also want robots to be doing all the hard physical work. I want AI to be running in the background. I want things to be like, I want there to be tons and tons of energy and fresh water. Like, I want robots to handle all the dirty logistics. I want electric vehicles to take over everywhere, so it's quiet and we're not running like loud, polluting machines everywhere. I think that's a really cool, fun vision of the future to work towards. And I think it's really, to your point, like, I think the car sort of steers where we're going collectively a little bit. Like, we end up creating the future that we've collectively imagined. And the default that is in most people's heads right now is this kind of like dystopian cyberpunk thing. And the amount of dystopian fiction to utopian fiction is not high. And so I try to propagate these positive visions of the future and just provide an alternative view. And I think, it's already, like I said, it's already changed how I allocate my time and my effort and my attention. And it's changed the companies that I'm working on, and the companies I choose to highlight, on my podcast, and who I give capital to, because I think that's a attainable vision of the future that we can all work towards.
I love it. Yeah, you planted a seed with me, and now it's like, okay, yeah. I
Pun intended.
Yeah, exactly, man. Last question is just, man, what's that parting word? The person listening after, what's something you want to leave them with? Whether it's a quote from Elon, whether it's a charge from yourself, a challenge. What's that parting word?
I'm just going to go back to my like 3-word summary of this book, which I think is also, a reasonable way to tie up everything that we've been talking about, which is just high effort optimism. Like, stay optimistic. The future will be amazing, but don't forget you got to work your ass off to make it so.
Love it. Eric Jorgensen, author of the Book of Elon. Go get your copy, man. Boom.
Get all the formats.
Yeah.
If you don't want to buy it, or you're not sure it'll be great, like, it's I put the digital versions up for free on the website, elonmuskbook.org. This is true of all my books. All my books have been digitally available for free. We've given away millions and millions of copies. We still sold millions and millions more. But yeah, go check those out. I truly believe anybody can get a useful idea that can change their life from any of my books, and hopefully dozens of them.
Yeah, let's go. Thanks for writing this book, man. Thank you for putting
Thank you. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for having me. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It's a generous act that you did, so thank you.